Hello there. I hope you're doing great. We are already ready for chapter 7. I'm excited because we're already halfway through the book. So this bibliotherapy is going quite well. I hope that you have been tracking along with me. I'm ready to actually reveal the title of the book because I didn't want you to originally start out judging the book by its cover, but I think that we've gone far enough for you to determine whether you actually want to continue listening in or would rather pass and come in for the next one that I choose. So this is the title of this book. It's called God Attachment: Why You Believe, Act, and Feel the Way You Do About God. And it is by Dr. Tim Clinton and Dr. Joshua Straub. So we're ready to head into chapter 7. We just got done talking about God attachment. You've taken time to do your surveys to figure out what your relationship attachment style is. And we're really just exploring the reasons why we find it hard to attach to God and to attach to others. And how do we get from a fearful, avoidant, even, we would use the word disorganized type of attachment style into a secure attachment place. So we're going to discover that as we go further into the book. So I'm so glad that you're with me. I hope that you're doing well. Today is April 21st. We are still all surrounded by this pandemic experience. Some of the states are beginning to open up for business, but all in all, we are journeying through this together. And so I hope that you have found some really valuable things to do to occupy your time. I hope that you have focused on structure, and that even though it feels like there is maybe some chaos and certainly some trauma, being triggered, I'm hoping that you found a place of peace, a place of solitude and some acceptance, and just a chance to be able to self-care and nourish yourself. And I have to say that it's really important to realize that if you're working on nourishing your body by working out and eating well and going to the doctor and having your labs checked, but you're not doing the mind and the emotional and the spiritual work, you're really cutting yourself short. So I'd love to encourage you to continue in optimizing yourself, bringing yourself more awareness, and helping you to be empowered to be able to be comprehensively nurtured the way that our Creator is wanting us to be. And I love to be a part of helping you with that. So we're going to go into chapter 7, and it's titled When It's Hard to Connect. Okay? So the beginning of it says, what else does this craving and this helplessness proclaim but that there was once in man a true happiness, of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace? This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those that are. Though none can help, since this infinite abyss can be filled only with an infinite and immutable object. In other words, by God himself. And that was by Blaise Pascal. The chapter starts with Wednesday nights were prayer meeting nights every week. As part of the evening service, church people would take time out to pray for missionaries, the needs in the church, personal problems, and the sick. Now, I, Tim, don't remember a lot about those nights except for the moment when time seemed to stand still. The time my dad taught me a very hard lesson about prayer. During prayer time, people would gather in groups, so I always went to the front of the church and would kneel beside my dad. As my time came to pray, I wanted to impress him, so I would recite my own little "Now I lay me down to sleep" prayer about missionaries in some faraway land that I had no idea even existed, and about keeping us all safe and in good health. A prayer I had memorized and quoted week after week after week. By the way he looked at me after I had finished, I could tell he wasn't really impressed. "Tim, why do you always repeat the same prayer?" I looked at him stunned that he would even say anything to me about it. And then he said, "Prayer is about sharing with God what is in your own heart. Your heart to his, one-on-one. It's not about repeating the same thing to him." I'm usually a slow learner, but that night I got it. How often have you prayed and felt as though your prayers bounced off the ceiling, that you had no real connection with God? Difficulties in our lives, whatever the cause, surface our true beliefs about ourselves, our sense of safety, and our view of God. Unlike a child who feels threatened and cries out to be reconnected with his mother or father, we need assurance that God is available, attentive, and accessible. There may be dozens of reasons people have trouble connecting with God, but what we want to do is focus on 3. 1, our perceptions of God based on our attachment patterns learned in childhood. 2, the invisible nature of God. And then 3, the reality of sin that separates us from God and clouds our perceptions. Presumptions. Our presumptions about God often start with how we've viewed our parents as we were growing up. In fact, studies have shown that a girl's view of her mother and a boy's view of his father are likely to have a direct effect on how they perceive God. Research shows that with 2 parents present, girls possess both a strong maternal perception of God and a more modern paternal God perception. It is influenced by both male and female parenting. This is why it's so important to have mom and dad in the home. While boys identify God almost exclusively with masculine characteristics such as justice and fairness and power and moral laws. That is, girls tend to maintain attributes of both power and nurturance, for example, compassion, caring, empathizing, and comforting in moral reasoning. Now, the study also found that the paternal view of God held by male children is one of power and authority. And the view of God characteristic of the maternal image is one of who is caring and welcomes the child. Also, if parents were perceived differently from what traditional roles would predict, that is, the father as the nurturing parental figure and the mother as the powerful maternal figure, children were more likely to view God as both powerful and nurturing. Cultural messages that teach children traditional roles the father and mother should or should not play, whether it be through television, church, or school, greatly affect the child's subsequent view of God later in life. By exhibiting behaviors that oppose the traditional mindset and surpassing the expectations, fathers who show nurturance and mothers who show power greatly impact their child's view of God in a more positive way. Did you hear that? By exhibiting behaviors that oppose the traditional mindset and surpassing the expectations, fathers who show nurturance and mothers who show power greatly impact their child's view of God in a more positive way. Through emotional involvement with his children, a father plays an indirect role in his child's view of God as nurturer. When fathers are absent, they are more likely to be idealized. This is important to note because the God image has been found to be determined more by the idealized parent than the actual parental figure available. Thus, if the father is present, the child develops a more balanced view of God as both powerful and nurturing than if the father were absent. And remember, I mentioned before, it's not just that the father's absent as in not in the home. I clearly want to express that it's the fathers that may be present in the home. Maybe there's been no divorce, but they weren't present emotionally. They weren't attuning. They weren't having the conversations. They weren't investing in those emotional places because traditionally, when we look at our culture, men tend to go off to work and they tend to be, in essence, responsible for covering, the bills and the financial provision, which, it's important, absolutely, but often the fathers are just unavailable emotionally. So when you're listening to this, you've got to apply that conceptual understanding that it's not just, well, my dad was gone, he left, he abandoned me, but also think of it through the lens of, no, my dad was present, but how present was he really with me emotionally? And what was I learning as I was watching him? And again, there's a saying, it's more of what's caught than what's taught in a child's world. In cases of absent and emotionally distant fathers, God can become a more perfect parent as a substitute attachment figure. Presumptions of secure attachment. As we saw earlier, those of us who enjoyed good enough parents felt secure as kids. And when we felt threatened during forays of exploration, we learned that our parents were safe havens of love and security, even in some of our darkest moments. It's not very hard for us in most cases to connect the dots between our parents and God. We naturally assume that the ultimate authority figure in the universe is, if anything, even more loving, more powerful, and more supportive than our parents. We aren't surprised or angry when God doesn't protect us from all harm or give us everything we want. We are convinced that good parents, both human and divine, understand, balance, and know that overprotecting children doesn't help children grow strong. Now we have the presumptions of anxious attachment. Many of us, however, come to God with very different presuppositions about his nature and the way he wants to relate to us. Those of us who are anxious, feel insecure in the relationship, we dance for God, hoping he will be pleased and in turn bless us. We sing and pray and study with all our hearts because we long so deeply to find security in knowing that God is pleased with us. We can quote dozens of passages about his love and acceptance, but deep in our hearts, we just don't believe it. When we miss a church service or quiet time, we're overwhelmed with guilt and shame and anxiety that God is surely mad at us. Does that sound familiar? We thirst for God, but demand that he protect us from being hurt ever again. And we are bitterly disappointed when he doesn't come through as we're sure that he should. We are very active in pursuing God and trying to please him. In fact, we are probably the most active of any of the relational styles. Reading books, listening to messages, praying for hours, and going to meetings. We hope we can do enough to win God's approval and feel connected to him. Occasionally, we feel very close to God. And those times may almost be ecstatic, and we want the feeling of closeness to last forever, but it doesn't. When those feelings of intimacy wane, we wonder what's wrong with us, and we may redouble our efforts to win God's approval again. When a new teaching promises marvelous healing and a deeper relationship with God, we eagerly buy the books and attend the seminars. When a new service opportunity arises, we're the first to volunteer. The challenge to connect with God really isn't about him, it's about us. Never feeling like we measure up. With knots in our stomach, we are just waiting for the other shoe to fall. Anxious, afraid, so we try anything to feel affirmed and loved by God. Now we have the presumptions of avoidant attachment. Those of us who have developed an avoidant attachment usually have an arm's length relationship with God. We tend to appreciate the facts of our salvation, but focus much more on our duty as believers than on the relationship that we have with God. The more committed of us devote our time and energies to making the church function effectively, and more often than not, our efforts may make a big difference. And when others talk about God's love, however, we aren't inspired, and we are rarely moved to desire it too. We just acknowledge that it's nice that others feel close to God, but a deep, rich relationship with God is not even on our personal radar screen. When other people express a heightened level of emotion, either about their needs or their experiences with God, our avoidance causes us to drift away because it makes us feel uncomfortable. When we are avoided in our relationship with God, it's easy to say we're dependent on him, praying and reading the Bible until things fall apart. When that happens, we close God out and wonder if he's really capable of loving or being there for us, because he does seem to us very distant. Now we have the presumptions of fearful attachment. Then there are those of us who suffered chaotic, abusive home environments. Many of us, the source of our comfort was also the source of our pain. If you didn't know whether you were going to be loved or smacked as a child, your heart still cries out for love. But eventually you wall everyone out. You have to. People and relationships are not safe in your estimation. And this pattern so easily spills over into our relationship with God as a fearful type, and we view our relationship with God the same as we view our earthly relationships with those who were supposed to love us. Unfortunately for us, we never really feel safe because all we have known is chaos. We thus carry this over into our adult relationships and subsequently feel disconnected and out of place in every relationship and every environment. In our fearful relational style, we may try almost anything to connect with God, but we seldom feel close to Him because we have learned to attribute the chaos to Him. It's kind of a gun-shy approach to God. Our lack of self-confidence makes us vulnerable to the claims of teachers and preachers who profess to offer the solutions to life and happiness, but we're soon disappointed again when the promises aren't fulfilled and we drift back into emotional and relational isolation. Let's see, I'm going to go a little bit longer. So the 3 painful patterns of attachment certainly shape our perceptions of God in a negative way, but they aren't the only reason we have trouble connecting with Him. God is invisible. When we talk to a friend face to face, we see the person's expressions and we hear his or her voice. We can tell by nonverbal communication too whether someone really means what is said. Even when we talk on the phone, the digital signal is translated to sound remarkably like our friend's actual voice. So every human-to-human relationship has a physical quality to it. Even our memories of those who are away from us by distant decades or a brief trip to the store are based on physical interactions. But God, as Jesus told the Samaritan woman, is spirit. We can't see Him, but we can see definite signs of His existence. The whole creation, from the vastness of space to the intricacies of the body's genetic code, tells us that God is great. He is creative and that He is attentive to every detail of our lives. In his book, Reaching for the Invisible God, Philip Yancey says that one of the characteristics of God is that He hides. If God were a physical being, Yancey reminds us, God's body would fill every space in the universe because He is omnipresent. He hides to protect us from harm, but also because He values faith as the connection point between us and Him. It is part of His plan for us to pursue Him, even as He pursues us. Yancey writes, "Does God play hard to get for the sake of discovery? The Bible sometimes portrays God as the initiator, the hound of heaven in pursuit. Yet just when we think we have God, we suddenly feel like Isaiah searching for the one who absconds. Now you see God, now you don't." We do know that in His relationships with people, God places a premium on faith, which can only be exercised in circumstances that allow for doubt. Circumstances such as God's hiddenness. Now, some people like Josh, my friend, some people like my friend, this is Josh talking, Brian mentioned earlier, refuse to believe until they can see and feel God. And they are in good company. Thomas, a disciple of Jesus, had been with Him every day for over 3 years, and he had heard Jesus' predictions that he would be killed and then raised from death back to life. And after the crucifixion, others reported to Thomas that they had seen Jesus and even talked to Him, but Thomas would have none of it. "Unless I see the nail marks in His hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into His sides, I will not believe it," said Thomas. Can you relate to Thomas? God, show me something tangible, some tangible results here. You too are one of those people who must see it to believe it. And then notice what happened next. About a week later, Thomas was hanging out at the house with the rest of the disciples, and Jesus showed up. Having no regard for the locked door, Jesus just appeared out of nowhere and said, "Peace be with you." And then He looked at Thomas and said, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." Obviously perplexed, yet enlightened by what happened, Thomas responded, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus replied, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. But blessed are those who have not seen me and yet have believed." Remember, this is the same disciple who earlier in Jesus' ministry had had enough courage and belief to stand beside Him even in the face of impending death. When Lazarus had died and Jesus wanted to go wake him up, the disciples said it would be too dangerous to go to Bethany. But Thomas challenged the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with Him." Even after having been with Jesus, he was still skeptical. Unlike Thomas, we don't have the opportunity to have Jesus bodily appear to us to show us His wounds, but we have plenty of evidence to stimulate our faith. The stars, the rivers, The oceans and mountains declare the glory of God. The scriptures clearly teach about the nature of God, and the history of the church shows us how people throughout the centuries have found God to be trustworthy. Though he is invisible and hides from us, we see evidence of him all around us every day. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And also want to say that I see God in people. I see God in the hearts of people, and in their changes, and in their growth, and in their courage, and in their willingness to rise up in times of struggles. And I see God in people when people choose to love and show kindness and compassion, and instead of paying evil for evil, they forgive, and they yield their hurt, and they yield their struggles to an almighty God. And when they do that, it's different. It's different than what this world offers us. And so I see God there too. So I just wanted to take a moment to encourage you to have eyes to see God. He's all around you, and he's so hungry to attach you, to have a relationship with you, to love you, to let you love him. And I want to encourage you in that. So I'll see you again. We'll go to chapter 7, part 2, and we'll get into some additional information. Have a blessed day. Thank you.